This video is sponsored by nobody, actually. It's not sponsored, but I do want to give a shout out here at the beginning to my second channel, TacticalTortoise. Over there, we're talking about Warhammer 40k in the digital sphere, going over tips and tricks for new and releasing 40k video games, as well as the long-running history of Warhammer 40k in the digital medium. Up there right now is an hour-and-a-half long retrospective on the original Space Marine, as well as a bunch of tutorial content for the newly released 40k Speed Freaks, and I'd like to get it to 1,000 subscribers before the release of my second long-form retrospective later this month. So please go check that channel out and drop a subscribe to it if it looks like something that you'd like. What's up, folks? Welcome back to TacticalTortoise. My name is Trevi, and this is another episode of the best armies in 40k. We're going to go through undefeated lists for this weekend's large events and talk about what makes them great. And this episode is for the last weekend of August 30th through September 1st. This was a big weekend for 40k with several large events going down, including the Nova Open, a super major over here on the East Coast of the United States, as well as a couple major level events, including La Vaz de Horus Open, as well as Hellstorm Wargaming's Super All-Stars 2. Before we dive into these events, I do want to give a quick shout out to everyone who supports Tactical Tortoise, either over on Patreon at patreon.com/tacticaltortoise, YouTube channel members, and Twitch subscribers. I love all of you. And let's dive in to a metagame breakdown. Adepta Sororitas is continuing to dominate the metagame, this week more securely than ever. And an interesting takeaway from this week is that we actually did have a lot of doubled up factions. So several factions had multiple undefeated results. So we actually didn't have too many factions go undefeated themselves because those wins were consolidated a little bit more than we typically see. Adepta Sororitas obviously being one of those, taking down Carnage at the Keep, La Vaz de Horus Open, Sunflower Showdown, and having undefeated results at the Super All-Stars 2 and Glasshammer GT Wolverhampton. Tyranids, surprisingly, coming out with 2 undefeated results, one from the Beat the Heat GT, where they won that event, one with an X0-1 from Pompey Village, although I do believe that they did take that event down with that draw on their record. World Eaters, also with 2 undefeateds, both at Hive City Gaming and the Malmo Game Week 2. That was an X0-1 over at Malmo. Aeldari, also interestingly, with 2 undefeated results as well, one at the EG Grand Slam and one at Call to Arms. Moving over to the Glasshammer GT, Chaos Knights went undefeated. That was actually Jay Middlecoat from Mohawk Minis, so it's cool to see him seeing some competitive success. We'll definitely talk about that list. Grey Knights also undefeated at the Beat the Heat GT. That was an X0-1 result, so 1 draw on the record, although important to note that was not a differential scoring system, so that was just a regular draw. We just scored the same number of points as the other player in the final round there. Chaos Space Marines took down the Nova Open. Derek Apshe from 40k Dirtbags is continuing to absolutely dominate the East Coast of the United States with his Chaos Cult. We'll dive into that list later on. Genestealer Cults taking down the Super All-Stars 2, along with another undefeated result coming out of Adepta Sororitas for that one. Dark Angels, also at the Malmo Game Week 2. And last, and certainly not least, Astra Militarum took down the Imperium Tertius 5 Iron Man event. That's a one-day event, and playing Astra Militarum in that style of format sounds absolutely exhausting, so shout out to that player. Now, many of the events this week were streamed. That includes the Super All-Stars 2, which was run by Hellstorm Wargaming and also covered on Hellstorm Wargaming. Go check them out for streaming from that event all weekend. However, a lot of the other streaming this week was actually over on Twitch. The official Warhammer channel streamed the Nova Open 2024, since they typically have a close partnership with the Nova team, and the La Vaz de Horus Open was streamed appropriately over on La Vaz de Horus over on Twitch. They are a Spanish language Twitch streamer focusing on Warhammer 40k and do a ton of event coverage, especially Spanish language live streams at various large events. Speaking of streaming, I think I should also mention that I will be live next weekend, starting on Friday, for the Enter the Crucible 40k Major. I'll have an event link up for that on the screen, so you can get notified when I go live live. I'll be live all weekend with incredible competitive 40k games. With that, let's get into some lists here. Starting with the La Vaz de Horus Open, Alvaro Perez went undefeated at this one with a Bringers of the Flame Adepta Sororitas detachment. This was a major level event that featured a cut to the top 4, and Alvaro was able to go undefeated after that top cut. This is a fairly standard Bringers of the Flame detachment, however, there are some interesting inclusions. The army was led by Morvenn Vahl and also saw the triumph of St. Catherine, an Iron Surplus Canoness, alongside a Palatine with Righteous Rage. Interestingly, we had 2 independent Dialogi. These usually just run around by themselves and act as independent utility units, so the army had a lot of scoring potential. But we also had the Fire and Fury Dialogus and the Righteous Rage Palatine that can combo together. Fire and Fury provides sustained 1 to the non-torrent ranged weapons in an attached unit. So the Dialogus allowing you to turn your miracle dice results into automatic 6s, alongside the Palatine, allows you to sustained and lethal automatically, which is very powerful on multi-guns. The one downside of that full combo, if it is how the army was being composed, is that it doesn't allow that squad to combat squad into an immolator because it becomes a 7 model unit. But what we might be doing there is actually taking it with the heavy weapons half of the Battle Sister squad. So we had 2 Dominion squads and 2 immolators to split the Dominions up. They could then scout move the immolators, the standard Sororitas aggression combo, and then follow that up with 5 Battle Sisters with a Melta, multi-Melta with that Fire and Fury combo to get additional damage out of that Melta and multi-Melta. I'm not 100% sure that that is how the army was composed, and to be fair, you can swap those selections around in the battle formation step wherever you need to apply those attached characters, but it was certainly a possibility. Following that up, we also had 20 Seraphim, 2 units of 10, 2 Castigators, 3 Paragon Warsuits to join with Morvenn Vahl, and those 2 Immolators I mentioned before. I like the inclusion of the Dialogus. I think it's a kind of a cute combo that doesn't really see play as much as it maybe should in Adepta Sororitas lists, but otherwise this is fairly standard Bringers of the Flame fare. And that moves us over to Tyranids. Spencer Bainter took the faction to an undefeated result at the Beat the Heat GT. This was a Vanguard onslaught with a trillion infantry in it. This army included the Death Leaper, 2 Broodlords, a Narrow Tyrant with an attached Zoanthrope unit for that guy to join into, a Winged Hive Tyrant with Stalker, so he chooses a unit at the beginning of the game and gets +1 to hit and wound against that enemy, as well as a Winged Tyranid Prime with 6 melee warriors to back him up. We had a couple of battle line units, including 10 Gargoyles and 10 Termagants to hold down objectives, a bunch of forward operators, including 2 Lictors and 20 Genestealers to attach in with those Broodlords, as well as a little bit of backline shooting, something that is always useful in these Vanguard onslaught lists. Otherwise, your opponent kind of gets to play however they want with their positioning and can screen you out very aggressively. That included a Tyrannifex with a Rupture Cannon to back up those Zoanthropes alongside the Neuro Tyrant. That creates a situation where your opponent wants to move out aggressively and screen your very aggressive early plays, with this list being able to push those 20 Genestealers and Lictors up the table, but then in doing so, you run the risk of just being blown up by the army's ranged attacks, and those Broodlords decide to take the turn off and hide for the remainder of the game, and in order to score in the later turns. Having ranged attacks in these styles of armies puts your opponent in sort of a catch-22 situation where they can either screen you out and potentially lose models for free, or they can allow the Broodlords and their Genestealers to potentially get into their deployment zone on turn 1 and lock them off of scoring objectives. Now, in a very similar style of army, we also saw World Eaters do fairly well this weekend with 2 undefeated results. Kind of surprising because they have been a little inconsistent over the last couple weeks, although they have been seeing some success more recently. Sam Dickinson at Hive City Gaming GT took the GT down with a Berserker Warband. This included Angron, Lord Invocatus, a Favored of Khorne Juggernaut Lord, and a Master of Executions with the Berserker Glaive. We had 2 units of Jackals for utility alongside a unit of 10 Khorne Berserkers to join with that Master of Executions and act as a pretty dangerous heroic intervention threat. Those guys were being ferried to the battle with a World Eater's Rhino, and we saw a bunch of 8-bounds. That included a unit of 6 Exalted 8-bound, a unit of 3 Exalted 8-bound, and 2 units of 3 Standard 8-bound. It's kind of a similar style to these Broodlord lists. You also get Advance and Charge, and you get a bunch of scout moves. Lord Invocatus can scout the Exalted 8-bound. You also have scouts naturally on the Standard 8-bound, and you're able to push this army super duper far across the table and just hopefully overwhelm your opponent with enormous numbers of ranged attacks. I guess I should also mention that there is a unit of Chaos Spawn in here to score some objectives as well. Pretty standard World Eaters stuff. What? You want to come up? You can come sit on my lap. No, you're gonna be weird. Moving over to Aeldari. Sebastian Long took down the EG Grand Slam with a battle host. This included an Autarch Wayleaper with the Phoenix Gem to respawn him when killed, the Avatar of Cain, as well as a Death Jester with Fate's Messenger to turn his dice into automatic 6s and trigger all of his critical hit or critical wound effects. We also had a Farseer to protect that Avatar of Cain, as well as turn its attacks into automatic 6s using Fate dice. That's a very powerful combo. Not only does it make the Avatar ridiculously hard to kill, but it also means that when the Avatar fires his Wailing Doom or uses Overwatch, the Farseer can use its ability to turn dice into automatic 6s when you use Fate dice, giving you an outlet for your poor dice in your Fate dice pool, and then automatically trigger the Sustained D3 on the Avatar's really powerful ranged attack. That is a classic combination. It makes this guy do almost as much damage in shooting as he does in melee, whereas normally his attack is fairly inconsistent. We also saw Fuegan the Fire Lord attached to a unit of Fire Dragons, a unit of Howling Banshees, and a ton of utility, including 5 Striking Scorpions, 5 Swooping Hawks, and 2 units of 5 Warp Spiders to subsume the table in 5 model Aspect Warrior utility units. Backing that up was also 3 units of Skyweavers, 2 units of 2, and 1 unit of 4, all of those rocking Haywire Cannons to burn down vehicles, although obviously a little bit of a weakness to monsters in this style of list. They can still potentially do a little bit of damage with their devastating wounds, but it is very inconsistent, and the hope is that units like the Avatar and Fuegan can kind of shore up that problem. The Skyweavers are also incredibly fast and small, so they can jump in and act as utility unit in a pinch. And we also have 2 Warwalkers with Bright Lancers to also help those matchups out. That moves us over to the Glasshammer GT Wolverhampton, which was won by Adepta Sororitas, but also undefeated were Chaos Knights. Again, this was Jay Middlecoat from Mohawk Minis and the WTC Judge Team, actual fame. Jay was rocking a Traitorous Lance led by a Knight Rampager with the Panoply of the Cursed Knight to make him significantly harder to kill. That's incredibly strong on the Rampager because unlike many of the Cerastus Knights or the other Forge World Knights, he doesn't have a baked-in invulnerable save in melee. His Ion Shields only work against ranged attacks. So the Rampager can often go in and kill something in melee, but then on the counter punch, get beat up really hard. The Panoply of the Cursed Knight, reducing enemy AP characteristics targeting the Rampager, make him a little bit tougher to kill. To those return attacks if he wanders into a position where his opponent can counterattack with melee units. Definitely allows the Rampager to play a little bit more aggressively or survive in awkward situations where you can sort of scam your opponent for the kill and then allow him to attack again. And every time a Knight Rampager attacks, it's a nightmare for your opponent. This guy's damage is ridiculous, and he has so many weapon profiles, he can basically choose the perfect weapon profile to attack at any point. We also then had a ton of War Dogs. That included 3 War Dog Brigands and 6 War Dog Carnivores. 9 War Dogs plus a Rampager is a huge number of vehicles for an army to get through, and that was also backed up by a lot of utility from the Allies section that included 3 units of 3 Nurglings and 2 Poxbringers. Aw, kitty. While the Nurglings can no longer perform actions in Pariah Nexus being OC0, the Poxbringers certainly can, and are, I believe, the cheapest unit in the Chaos Demons faction that can act in that capacity. They normally act as a leader for Plague Bearer units, giving them 5+ critical hits to trigger their lethal hits on, and they themselves have kind of a, I don't want to say impressive melee profile, but definitely a decent melee profile themselves. And they also have a little bit of synergy with Chaos Knights, giving -1 to Battle Shock tests within 6 inches of them. This is useful, comboing with the Chaos Knight army abilities to force a bunch of Battle Shock checks and impose additional penalties on them, but also just using these guys as deep strikers who can complete actions in situations where the Nurglings aren't that useful or you don't want to be taking a turn off with a War Dog is also just fine for 55 points. Now, speaking of Chaos Demons, let's move over to the Demon Hunters of the game. Jimmy B went undefeated at the Beat the Heat GT.
Roger, what alliteration.
This was a 4-0-1 record, so while Jimmy did not take down the event, he did go technically undefeated with a draw, using this fairly standard Teleport Strike Force featuring a bunch of Nemesis Dread Knights, including 2 Nemesis Grand Masters, one with the Liber Demonica to give him +1 to wound in melee, and one of them with the Sigil of Exigence to reactively redeploy in response monster shooting, alongside Kaldor Drago and 10 Brotherhood Terminators for him to hop into and provide his charge buff. We also then saw 2 Strike Marine squads add a little bit of forward pressure with their scout moves and objective secure, 1 Interceptor squad for utility, and 3 more Nemesis Dread Knights for some backline shooting. Now those Grey Knights should have their work cut out for them because the largest event of the weekend, the Nova Open 2024, was taken down also by Chaos. Derek Apshe continues to be up to his old antics with a Chaos Cult, going undefeated at the 8-round Super Major. Interestingly, the Nova did not use any top cuts or anything like that, so Derek was the only undefeated player at the end of the weekend. It is important to note that had more wins under his belt than any of the other results we're talking about this weekend, winning after all of those 8 rounds. We've also got some other big names competing and placing highly at this event. I'm going to be talking about those lists on my Tuesday live stream, so don't forget to get notified when that goes live. Derek's list included 2 epic heroes, Cypher and Fabius Bile, mostly to act as kind of resilient objective holders. Cypher is a load operative and Fabius Bile can regenerate himself, so both of them are very difficult to engage with at range and allow them to hold down objectives, even in the positions where these significantly less resilient cultists would normally go down. We also then had a Dark Apostle with the Amulet of Tainted Vigor, allowing him to regenerate models back into his unit. A Dark Commune with the Incendiary Goad to give +1 strength and potentially +1 attacks once you've lost models in the attached unit, as well as another Dark Commune with Warped Foresight to allow his unit to scout. Those guys were all attaching into 3 16-strong units of Accursed Cultists to apply their buffs, and alongside those Desperate Pact mechanics and all of these stratagems that can potentially deal damage to the units, being able to return models or gain benefits when the units are damaged combo exceptionally well with the detachment abilities of the Chaos Cult. We then had a bunch of demonic allies, 10 Demonettes to unlock a non-battle line slot in order to include 5 Seekers of Slaanesh. That gives the army additional mid-board control with another really fast-moving scouting unit to combo alongside the Dark Commune that's scouting. That gives you a ton of pressure on the first turn potentially. We also had a Beast of Nurgle and 3 Nurglings to act as more resilient objective holders. That was all backing up 110 Cultist and Traitor Guardsmen, 6 units of 10 Traitor Guardsmen and 5 units of 10 Cultists to absolutely swarm the board and score 1,000,000 points. We've been seeing Chaos Cults like this pop up in events over the last couple of weeks after the detachment was sort of unlocked, and it's been having some fairly reasonable success. I think coming out as one of the better performing detachments in the Chaos Space Marine Codex. The ability to absolutely swarm the table with an immense number of high OC scoring units between the demonic allies, the insane number of infantry, and those super fast Accursed Cultists, that's backed up by strong characters and incredible damage from those Accursed Cultist teams, not to mention the fact that the army's also packing a bunch of special weapons on the Traitor Guardsman units, and you can't really count those out for damage as well. Makes it so that in matchups where your opponent doesn't have a ridiculous amount of fast infantry clearing, that's not only able to clear the infantry that is blocking it into its deployment zone potentially, but also can get into sticky positions behind line of sight blockers and outside terrain, where it can kill the cultists and Traitor Guardsmen that are running at it before they start to contest your objectives. This list is almost unstoppable in scoring and will just blow you out in terms of points. Now that's very appropriate because we're also going to be talking about a very similar list moving over to the Super All-Stars 2, which was taken down by Innes Wilson, rocking a Genestealer Cult Outlander Claw. Outlander Claw is a fascinating detachment that dramatically increases the OC characteristic of your mounted and vehicle units. Those are the most resilient units in the Genestealer Cult Codex, and while they aren't the hardest thing in the world to kill, massing them on objectives makes those objectives extremely difficult to take from the GSC player, and it also grants Adel and Jackal's objective secured, so if you're not able to steal those objectives away, there's a high likelihood that they will remain under the GSC control for the foreseeable future. The army was really focused on those vehicles, including 2 units of 2 Achilles Ridge Runners, 1 more individual Achilles Ridge Runner equipped with a mortar to trigger its crossfire. The other units of 2 Ridge Runners were equipped with mining lasers, as well as 3 Goliath Rock Grinders and 2 Goliath Trucks. Those could embark the insane number of infantry this list was also packing, including 8 total units of Acolyte hybrids, 6 units with hand flamers, and 2 units with auto pistols. The hand flamer units were actually equipped entirely with hand flamers. They weren't taking any demolition charges in those, and they're able to embark into the rock grinders and double pull up into the Goliath trucks and potentially use those firing decks to provide anti-infantry shooting out of those trucks as well. Especially once disembarking those transports, they can also do some significant damage, getting wound rerolls against enemies on objectives, which give them okay damage from their hand flamers and pretty solid damage in melee as well. That was also backed up by 3 Keller morphs. These guys are just solid. They get a reactive pseudo overwatch against enemies that move within 12 inches of them that then allow the Keller morphs to move after shooting. And while they can't re-embark into transports after doing that shoot and scoot, what they can do is just bounce around the table and muck up with your opponent's movement. In addition to reactive moves from the Jackals and Achilles Ridge Runners and the transport mechanics that the army's using very heavily, this makes this army ridiculously tricky to play against. And it's really easy to mess up, potentially activation lock yourself, get move blocked, and give the GSC army the ability to survive on objectives and absolutely dominate the primary objective scoring. Now that was just over to the Malmo Game Week 2. Olaf Svensson went undefeated at that event 4-0-1. That was using differential scoring, so it is fairly easy to get that draw result. Did not end up winning the event with this Dark Angels list, but did go undefeated. This is a Dark Angels Gladius task force in the vein of many Dark Angel Gladius task forces that we've been talking about on this series over the last couple weeks. Included Azrael, an Apothecary Biologus with Fire Discipline to join into an Eradicator squad, 2 Gladiator Lancers for long-range shooting, a Repulsor to carry that Eradicator squad around the table, and a ton of infantry, including 5 Assault Intercessors, 3 units of 5 Jump Pack Intercessors, and 2 units of 5 Scouts to act as utility, an Inceptor squad, which is a nice utility unit in a pinch or can just shoot people to death with their guns, and 3 units of 5 Deathwing Knights. Don't have too much else to say about this list. It's pretty standard Gladius Task Force stuff, so we will move on to our last list of the week. This is Alexander Tepe's Astra Militarum from the Imperium Tertius 5 Iron Man event. Alexander was rocking Gaunt's Ghost, Lord Solar Leontis, 2 Tempestus command squads to join into 2 units of Tempestus Scions, the list was also bringing, alongside a standard platoon command squad to join in with Lord Solar Leontis. They could join together on a Catachan Jungle Fighter unit. There is a Cadian Shock Trooper squad in the army, but the platoon command squad can't join into that, so it's probably jumping in on the Jungle Fighters. That's actually something I realized way too late in the process doing some Militarum list building myself. For whatever reason, the Cadian Shock Troopers are too good to be led by regular command squads. Only Cadian commanders for them. We'd had some dedicated transports to transport that infantry up the table, 2 Chimeras and 2 Torox Primes to get those guys to the fight. Imagine the Torox Primes for carrying around the Tempestus command squads. That's a pretty solid combo because the Tempestus Scion are getting sustained hits and hit rerolls targeting enemies on objectives, giving them a lot of special weapon conversions that they then benefit from fire support from the Torox Primes from, giving that combination kind of a lot of damage. We were also just backing that up with an immense amount of mid-board presence from 18 Bulgrin, the full 3 units of 6 Bulgrin squads to dominate the center of the table and back up those transports. That was all backing up some long-range fire support from 1 Rogaldorn battle tank. It's interesting to see the kind of lack of armor in this list. We had the tank commander babysitting that Rogaldorn to issue orders to him, but other than that, that's basically all of the heavy vehicles in the list. Obviously, we get a little bit of shooting from the Chimera and Torox Primes, but that's not generally an immense amount of damage. However, we are focusing on those Bulgrin and Tempestus command squads to actually pile on some additional damage. And with that, those are all of the best armies in Warhammer 40k for this week. Let me know down in the comment section which one is your favorite. Thanks so much for watching all the way to the end of the video. And don't forget to go over to Tactical Tyrannosaurus and drop a subscription down there. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming. And with that, I don't have anything else to say. We're done. I'm done recording. Stop it.